Welcome to the Kent Lapp Podcast.
September the 8th of 2019. Was that Pastor Ray's last day as lead pastor at Immanuel? And then you took over. It was September of 19 in any case, right?
That's right.
So here we are, November of 2020. So it's a year and a couple of months. So it's just crazy how fast it's going. What are your thoughts on the transition? What worked, and what would you recommend other pastors do different?
Man, I don't think we have enough time to chase this out in detail because it was such a big deal. I suppose that's the first thing, right? Like acknowledging right out of the gate, a pastoral succession is a big deal. Now, it might be, it's always a big deal. It might be easier if the church is a smaller church. But when you get into what Tim Keller calls a large church, when you get into 600 to 900 people, trending on a very large church, it's hard to get 600 to 900 people or 1,000 people, we'll just say for a nice round number, to go from point A to point B together. It takes so much planning. Have mercy on your pastors because they're behind the scenes. They're just trying not to leave anyone behind and get everybody moving in the same direction positively for Jesus. So that's hard anyway. A pastoral succession is just a big task. And the elders of Immanuel, I think, wisely recognize we have to get a big head start on this. Now, they knew when Ray had announced from the very beginning that when he was 70, he wanted to step down as lead pastor. And we don't use the word retire because, in truth, he's busier now than, maybe he's ever been.
Mm-hmm.
So knowing that was on the horizon helped the elders to do a lot of long-term planning. So even before I came on as an elder, they were already talking to, potential next lead pastors. It was just like casual conversations, to see, is there any interest at all? So that they wanted to have a someone in place way ahead of time, because so much of what makes a church is intangible. I mean, it's not the doctrinal statement. It's not the stuff you can read. It's the intangibles of the culture, the vibe, and the lead pastor and the elders they must be the embodiment of the culture. You have to be able to look at them and say, well, yeah, that's what we're after. That's what we want for other people. We want men that look like that. So they wanted to have someone in place, I think 3 or 4 years out. I think 3 was the minimum, 4 would be ideal. And I don't know at what point my name came up. I certainly was not about to throw it in the ring. It's too weighty of them. I needed a kick out of the door. Because I revere the ministry of Immanuel. I mean, it's not just a church to me. It's my home. It's where literally my best friends are. My spiritual aunts and uncles are. It's my family. So I don't want to mess it up. I mean, I have a selfish reason here. I want it to work for me because this is where Immanuel is where Jessica and I first felt forgiven. Now we knew we were Christians when we came to Immanuel. We knew our sins are forgiven. But we just didn't feel very forgiven. And about a year into the preaching of the gospel at Immanuel, and the emphasis on the free grace of God, and the doorway, I think, into felt forgiveness, which is walking in the light, honesty. That combination changed us. We didn't even know what was happening. And about a year in, I looked over at Jessica on the way home one day, and I think after church, I said something like, I think I finally feel forgiven. I've known I've been forgiven, but I didn't feel very forgiven. I feel my sins have been taken away. I feel, like I'm living in an exhale, So, and she felt the same way. So that I still don't want to mess that up for anybody. So the elders actually approached me I don't know when it was, probably 2015. And I was in place as assistant pastor around 2016, I think. So I was there 3 years. And when I first came on as assistant pastor, no one knew that they had talked to me about becoming lead pastor, because we were testing it out. Romans 12, that by testing you may discern the will of God. So that time of non-pressured pastoral ministry was really important to me.
Mm-hmm.
It enabled me to just learn and preach and do normal pastor stuff with Ray's coaching without everybody looking at me and thinking like, oh, you better come on along.
Right.
You better speed it up. You're not going to make it.
Yeah. And at that point, no one outside of the elders and maybe a select group had knowledge that you were on track to become the next lead pastor, correct? And
that's right.
Matter of fact, you didn't even know, like, it was being discussed and you were testing it, but it wasn't a given, right?
No, it wasn't.
Certainly, because I remember when we first started having discussions, which, by the way, that does seem to me like one of the things that Ray and the elders did very well, was giving this long on-ramp. I mean, if you say, like, even from the beginning, that was in 2009 or 10, like, that was 10 years.
That's right.
That people knew, hey, in a decade that Ray's going to be transitioning, which when something's 10 years out, it's like, well, that just seems so far away. And it is. But when it gets to 5 years out, it's like, boom, it's here so quickly. But that does seem to me like one thing that Ray and the elders at the time did such a good job at is building in a long on-ramp.
Yes.
And setting the expectations. I remember when Marianne and I went through the new member seminar at Immanuel, Ray taught it was down in the gathering place, and it was on a Saturday from like 10 to 1 or something like that, or 9 to 1. And that was the first, we'd been visiting, but that was the first that we'd heard that he's going to be transitioning out.
Wow.
In like 2 or 3 years, whatever that was at that point. And that was hard to hear because we really loved Ray's preaching and everything.
Yeah.
But then also it was also good for us to hear, because then we needed to make the conscious decision that we're going to join this church for basically how God is working through the church, and not for Ray.
That's right.
And it was good for people to kind of know, even a few years out, that he's going to be transitioning when he's 70. Because then if people keep coming on board, then they're there for the work of the Lord and not just Ray.
Yes.
And so, I think the long on-ramp was good. But I remember then when it came time to like have discussions like with the church about this thing, and like actual like family gatherings and that type of thing, we were in on a couple of those meetings. And, my understanding was like, sure, you were being coached and brought along, but it was not a given that you were going to be the next lead pastor.
That's right.
And the group or whoever was reading books and talking to the experts and everything about like how to do this transition properly, and like looking for the next lead pastor. Sure, you were one of them, but it wasn't a given. It certainly wasn't a given at that point that you would be the next lead pastor. And I remember at one of the family gatherings, it was just like, I think even someone might have even said it in the back left corner. I don't remember who it was, but the comment was just like, "Hey, what is anyone thinking about TJ here?"
Yeah.
So, which I think was great, because it's like, you are the next lead pastor of Immanuel, certainly because it's the will of the Lord. Like, that was the call of God on your life, and in the sovereign plans of God, you are the lead pastor at Immanuel. But even beyond that, it's not like it was a given that you just happened to be around and you were the handy man to pick for this. It was like, no, we did all the due diligence. We consulted the experts. We read books. We took years for this. We looked across the country or the world for like the best fit to have, to find someone to be the next lead pastor at Immanuel. And praise God, as it turns out, the best man in the world for this job at this time is TJ Timms, and he's right here among us. Like that was how that process seemed to go. That's how I perceived it to be, which I think was another really good thing. Like if someone amongst the group or the church or whatever is the right person, that's fantastic. But if they're not, you shouldn't like settle, because someone happens to be among. And I just felt like they did such a great job on just looking at all the options all over. And as it turns out, yes, the best man was among us, which is great.
Yeah, I mean, we believe in the providence of God, the sovereignty of God. I could not have anticipated that I would be Ray Ortland Jr.'s successor. I would have turned it down years before. I had to warm up to the idea. And the Lord orchestrated that whole thing that I would even end up there. And but it's not as if Immanuel made also an investment in me. So they I suppose, had pity on me, looked at me and saw, okay, this guy's heart's in it. We want to help him. The Lord brought him here. But I didn't come in ready. There's no way I could have pulled off getting my PhD if Immanuel had not co-signed and said, we're going to make this happen for you. So the first 3 years of being on staff, I wasn't really pulling my weight. I was doing the PhD basically half time, really, and getting a kind of survey of the ministry, preaching more and more, getting coached by Ray regularly. They made a huge investment in me, and I couldn't have done it otherwise. I couldn't have come in other words, where I needed to be on my own. It's not like just a matter of timing. I couldn't have actually pulled it off.
Mm-hmm.
So, man, I am so grateful. I think that's the way it's supposed to work.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes, I don't think, I'm not trying to chase a rabbit trail here, but I don't think that the seminary church pipeline model we have right now is ideal. I think it works. I think it's wonderful. It's amazing, really. I mean, it took so much work to build out the kind of system we have. But I don't think it's the ideal system. I think the ideal system is when someone is invested in by a congregation, brought up. In other words, they get their education in the kind of middle of the ministry that they're going to serve in.
Mm-hmm.
And Immanuel made that happen for me. So,
yeah, I can see that. And you're just saying that way as opposed to guys being called in the ministry, going to seminary, and then just looking for any church that will hire them.
Yeah,
or call them.
I think it works on some level.
Sure.
Because there's alignment between churches and seminaries. Well, there used to be more than there is now. But you can basically know something about what's coming to you when you call a pastor from this seminary versus that one. But every church culture is a little bit different. It's like a personality.
Mm-hmm.
So the ideal thing, I think, is when the seminaries and the churches are basically the same place. And I'm not saying anything controversial. I mean, I think Al Mohler put it pretty sharply a few years ago. I think he said something like, the reason we have seminaries is because churches don't do it, or maybe even won't do it. So I think the best seminaries are kind of working their way out of a job. Because it belongs properly in the church. It's not another sphere of reality, a theological education. It properly, it belongs in the church.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, not to chase too much of a rabbit trail here, but this is a classical way of thinking. Even Karl Barth, who's on the liberal end of the theological spectrum for some people, even Karl Barth acknowledged the highest form of theology is preaching. And if that's the case, if we're doing the highest form of theology in churches, why wouldn't we be doing the lesser forms of theology, which are, teaching people Greek and Hebrew and systematic theology?
Oh, I see. Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
In other words, the church isn't.
Yeah, that is fascinating.
Yeah, the church isn't a sort of step down from good theology
Mm-hmm.
or the serious theology.
Mm-hmm.
The church is where it's happening.
Yeah.
So I that's what I say. I don't think the current arrangement is ideal. However, I am so grateful for our seminaries. I just want to put them in our churches.
Yeah,
That's all I'm saying.
That makes sense. Yeah, that's a fascinating idea. And not that it would happen like that, but it's still, I totally agree with that, because then if you can have someone coming up in the ministry, then you're getting the DNA and the culture and the coaching at that local level. You're still getting the education.
Yeah.
Whether you're using a seminary material or what, you can kind of have the best of both worlds then if you're bringing them up within the church.
Yes.